Cool. Well, we're excited to introduce Tommy and Liza, and we're going to spend some time with them today, talking to them about the messaging and notification infrastructure that they worked on at respective companies. So Tommy's currently at Airbnb, where he leads the team there. We're going to ask for introductions in a second, so you can be a bit more specific about what you do. And Liza is currently an investor at Matrix Partners, previously led the notifications infrastructure team at Slack as product manager. So before we get started with them, this is kind of the agenda, is we're going to spend about an hour learning from Liza and Tommy. And then if you're interested in doing so, please join us afterwards. We're going to have a bit of a meet and greet. I know networking can sometimes be awkward over Zoom, but we're all really friendly. So we would love to have you hang out and chat if you're interested in it. We've got a lot of people on the call who work in this space every day. So I think that you'll meet a lot of people who are really relevant to kind of the work that you do or are thinking about doing. The panel discussion will be recorded, so if you aren't able to attend for the full thing, you'll be able to catch this on YouTube afterwards. And then the happy hour networking session will not be recorded, so no need to worry about that. And then finally, after this, we're going to send out some more information where we're pulling together using a forum community called Discourse, where anyone who's working on notification infrastructure can hang out, whether you're working with Courier or not. We would love to have everybody have a place to come together and talk about the best practices of developing and building messaging, notification infrastructure, all of the things related to really software to human communication. All right, so I did a bit of a best effort job of introing you briefly, Tommy and Liza, but maybe per Tommy's request, let's start with Liza here. And Liza, would you mind introducing yourself and telling us a little bit more about what you do today, but also specifically would love to hear a bit more of the context behind your time at Slack.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, briefly today, as Troy mentioned, I am an investor at Matrix Partners. We invest in seed and Series A companies. And I focus particularly on developer tools and software as a service. Prior to joining the team at Matrix, I was at Slack for almost 4 years. I started my time on the developer platform. And in that time, a kind of key for those of you who've built on top of the Slack platform or have used it when using Slack at work, a key component of the Slack platform is allowing third-party services to send notifications into Slack. And it was during that time that I really got interested in the notification problem at Slack and moved over to start a team within our core messaging unit, specifically focused on both notifications infrastructure and our notifications product. It's skewed heavily, as I'm sure we'll talk about today, toward notifications infrastructure, because despite notifications being a key part of the user experience at Slack, we built it early on and we did not do a good job kind of maintaining and updating that as the product scaled. So we were in a position where it was really important for us to reinvest in the way that notifications worked by default and the way that users could configure them for their kind of unique needs at work. Worth noting in this conversation, and I actually don't know how much you know about this, Troy, but prior to Slack, I was at Robinhood, where I also led all of our notifications efforts. That included writing all of the inline CSS for the emails that Robinhood sent. And I committed to myself I would never write any inline CSS again in my career. And it was from there that I kind of transitioned off into product. So I've been working on notifications things for the majority of my career.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us, Liza. And Tommy, I know at Airbnb, what you work on is notifications is a part of it, but it's a bit broader. Could you tell us a little bit more about what you do at Airbnb?
Yes, but first, I concur with Liza.
There we go. All right. That you used your only one. You get one I concur token, and you spent it so early.
Thank you for having me and Troy. So some background at Airbnb. I joined Airbnb about 5 years ago, and I joined a team that worked directly with the CEO, Brian, and we worked on building and launching and growing the experiences business, what's known now today as Airbnb Experiences. And while I was on that team as an engineer, we're growing it, right? So, and we're trying to get users to discover it. So as an engineer, I'm going through our website, trying to figure out where can I ping people and tell them, hey, check this out. Of our user base, who can we send emails out to, push notifications, SMS out to? So we did this nonstop, and we got to a point where we had to scale ourselves as engineers. We're just doing everything design and marketing is telling us to do. And so we built tools for ourselves to scale ourselves. Then we got to a point where, okay, now we have marketers, we have ops, we have customer relations, et cetera, that want to do it as well. So can we make our engineering scripts more non-developer friendly? And so around that time, we were responsible for the infrastructure as well. And we got to a place where, can we build something that makes it easy for our non-engineers in the company, which consist of almost 80% of the company. 80% of the company are non-technical. How can we empower them to harness the notifications power that us engineers are so used to? And so that's over the last 2 years, that's what the team has started, and we have been working on. And the internal platform, it's an internal platform for marketing and promotions through email, through in-product, et cetera, and it's called Omni. So I'll be talking a little bit about our experience in that realm as well.
Cool. And then I think, from our discussions, you also have the more transactional component of that that's kind of related, like kind of wrapped in Omni / separate, and so that's Rookery. So it's kind of like Omni and Rookery working together for all of the communication, I believe.
Yes. Yep. We'll be going over that, all those layers.
Yeah. Cool. One of the reasons why I was so excited to have you both join us tonight is because I thought that you obviously both great brands that you've worked at that are well known for the excellence in communication, but like coming kind of from pretty different angles, right? You've got a B2C company, best-in-class B2C company, and a best-in-class B2B collaboration platform, right? So it's pretty interesting. I'm gonna start with you this time, Tommy, or actually, in fairness, in this case, I'll go to Liza one more time. So why are notifications and messaging? Why was it really important to Slack? And like specifically, what I mean here is in the case of both Slack and Airbnb, both companies have made a pretty significant investment where both companies have dedicated teams that all they do is focus on this, which is not true for every business, right? And so I'm just curious, why for, in your case, Slack, was there a need for a dedicated team, that level of investment?
Yeah. So with Slack particularly, and I think this is true of most messaging platforms, notifications are a key part of the user experience, in the sense that, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it, like, did it fall, is very similar for a conversation. If somebody's speaking into a channel, but no one is aware that that's happening, that especially early on when your whole team isn't using Slack, that's really, really a challenge for getting people to value and using the product. So it's, with a messaging service, how and when you pull somebody in is key to notifications. I think one of the things that's really interesting about notifications in Slack, and why this was it was like a full investment area as well, is it's not just a push notification. I think oftentimes when people think about notifications, they're like, oh yeah, push notifications that come on your phone. But it's really the broader experience of how somebody's attention gets pulled into your product across many different channels. And once they're in the product, which was also a key service area for my team, which is a little differentiated, I think, from oftentimes non-messaging or other services, which meant that ambient ways like bolding a channel or putting a red dot on something, we also saw that as falling in this broader scope of notifications. And as we invested more within core messaging and notifications, it became really important to build and scale that team, because when that story is really broken up and lives within a bunch of different areas of the business, that shows. And so making that all cohesive, and that story of how you pull somebody's attention into the product and how you let them control it, was a key shift for us in kind of being able to really take a step back and think about, what do we want this experience of being notified and pulled into our product to look like, from the first day that somebody uses Slack all the way through to when maybe their team has 100 or 1,000 plus channels that they're managing, and they're figuring out where to divide their attention at work. That layered on top of, which I'm excited to talk about with a group that knows notifications and is excited about notifications, our notification volume was extremely high. So building an infrastructure that was able to support the growing company and the number of notifications that we were sending was really, really key as we began to scale, and particularly scaled to Enterprise Grid, our larger enterprise offering.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And And Tommy, you know, one of the things that Liza just mentioned that I know is something that you worked hard on as well is not just the downstream messaging that's going to go over email or push, but that in-app messaging, right? I'd love to, you know, for you to talk a little bit about like why was there a need for an internal team for this, but also specifically, maybe you can talk a bit about that, because that's not really, you know, some of what you shared with me that Omni does. I was like, whoa, that's mind blowing.
Thank you. Very kind words. So yes, so why is notifications important in our business? You know, Brian talks about what is Airbnb's product? Is it the community? Is it this marketplace? You know, he says that it's the trust that we have. It's the trust that you build with a stranger that you have no idea that lives across the world. And how do you build that trust? Yeah, you can read reviews, but you have to interact with the person. You ask, you build trust through interactions, answering a question, fulfilling that question, inquiring and fulfilling on a timely basis. And what we found is that we have leading indicators in terms of what we predict could lead to a booking. And one of the top leading indicators is if you message a host. So we always had this metric of search to contact. And so once you contact the host, that's a pretty good match right there. Now, if the host doesn't respond, we also know that the longer a host takes to respond, the more likely the guest will go somewhere else, and that host loses that. And we actually built that into what our Superhost program. A Superhost program, you have to have stellar response rate in a small amount of time. And so it's so core to the guest flow and the host flow that they're constantly reminded of, hey, look, you have a request. Hey, look, you need to answer. Hey, look, you need to accept it. Hey, look, you need to pay. Hey, look, here is your upcoming check-in and reservations. So it's super critical to our business.
And if I'm a host on Airbnb and Liza is going to, you know, book a property of mine, how do I know? Like, does Airbnb send me an email to let me know that Liza sent me a message inside of Airbnb? Like, how does that work?
So we do 3 things by default, just because we rather be sure, safe, and sure. So safe and sorry. So we'll send you the in-app message. We'll send you a push. We'll send you an SMS, and we'll send you an email. But that was in the beginning. Now we will do one channel first, the least costful one, and then work our way down. And as we all know, SMS costs a lot. So that is our last resort.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Liza, I know Slack somewhat famously does something similar. There's the whole infamous flow chart of, you know, how and whether and when to notify somebody. I think still there's like 3 channels involved there. There's
many channels involved. The flow chart actually, unfortunately, we wanted to make it simpler, but it did get a little bit more complicated before it gets better. And this is something I will say up front that I think is so important for product managers that are focused on notifications. Defaults are so key. So like 2 things I think that are really important to think about are what are your defaults? And then once you set them, what are the moments in time after that where you may want to help your user adjust those defaults? So for us, the default channels are initially we will send you email. Once you install the Slack app on iOS or Android, we actually turn off email and you can turn it back on. There's some exceptions to that now, like before, but that's the simplest way to think about it. We don't do anything with SMS. It's something we've explored, but we never touched. And then within push notification, we do in-app if a message comes in. So like Troy, if you and I are DMing and then Tommy DMs me, I'll get a push notification that still comes in. The real complexity for channels in Slack is we made a decision early on, which I'm happy to talk about in more detail throughout this as well, that if you were active on your desktop client and we were not going to send you push notifications on your phone, which in theory was, we think a lot about like, how do we help people manage attention at Slack and how do we not be too disruptive at work? And that was a way for us to say like, oh, you're already working on your computer. We don't need to send you push notifications to your phone. The logic became really challenging for us at how if people leave their computers open all the time, they background Slack. We had a big issue with gaming companies where they have software running on their computer that mimics keyboard and mouse activity. So that became really challenging, but we also thought a lot about what I call interoperability between the desktop experience and the mobile experience, which is one thing that I think we still have a lot of room for improvement on.
Yeah, I will tell you personally, that was that feature, the one where if I'm live on my desktop, I don't get a mobile push. That was actually what sold me on Slack back when it was new. I was a HipChat customer. I'd been a HipChat customer for a long time. I've been on the work chat train for a long time. I don't want to date myself here, but like I used to bring IRC into every company I worked at, and we would use IRC. And then HipChat came along. I was pretty happy with HipChat. A friend convinced me to try Slack, and that was the one thing that convinced me to switch, because HipChat had super noisy notifications where I'd be getting them, and then it's just like I go check my phone and I just have and iOS wasn't as good at categorizing them and folding them together and stuff, so it was like really painful at the time. But so at least one customer switched because specifically of that.
I love to hear that, and it's a net positive feature, I believe, but the challenge, and this is where like it's really important to allow people control over changing settings for different user needs. This is like one area where notifications is an area where I think more settings are often better, and I don't say that about any other area of product.
Sure. Yep.
But it's really, you want things to meet users' expectations, and the challenge became people were missing notifications. So
yeah, that makes sense. And especially I think the people that want to configure the notifications are probably the ones that like really care, right, and tend to be pretty noisy. Out of curiosity, I haven't asked you this, and I don't know if you know this. Do you know like what percentage of people would customize their notification settings?
I do. It was less than 5% of people that customize their notification settings.
Wow. So so to your point, the importance of defaults there.
Yeah, and but it's really important for those users that do it. And this is, I don't want to get off track on questions, so we can come back to this if it's interesting, but one theme that I really pushed within our team, and a lot of this product development is still to come at Slack because we were focused really primarily on infrastructure, and they still are. I'm still close with my team, even though I'm not there, but is putting control in context. So allowing people to adjust their notification settings in the moment when something happens that is related to what the setting would be. So an example of that is I did a lot of work on Do Not Disturb. Since it's a work product, we wanted to help people control the hours they receive notifications. But one thing that we thought about doing to help people understand what Do Not Disturb is, for example, the first time you receive a notification on the weekend, asking somebody then, hey, do you want to receive notifications on the weekend? For most users, they're a lot more likely to do that than go find the Do Not Disturb settings in
that makes sense.
In the settings panel in Slack.
That makes sense. So if we're thinking about like, controlling attention management to a certain extent, another way to think about that is signal versus noise. Tommy, I'm curious, how you've got an interesting problem you've created for yourself, where you have done an effective job of enabling the 80% of Airbnb employees who aren't technical now to start sending messages, which is amazing. But I imagine a lot of them now want to send messages to Airbnb customers. How do you deal with handling how often somebody gets hit?
Okay, so it started off primitive. So even before we had non-engineers being able to send out notifications, it was actually a Wild West. Every team can make an API call to Rookery, which is our notification infrastructure, and it will send out the last mile to the different vendors. Any team can do that. Then we built another service where it would buffer that. You make an API call here, and you would configure what we call a silent day rule manually. So again, it's still a free for all, but at least they're thinking about it. And in this YAML file, let's say your email, you write 6, which means another email that is, this email won't go to someone if they received another email within 6 days. And then some people would go 3, 4. What we found is everyone just going down to 2 and 1. So eventually that didn't work anymore. And so it's tricky. And then once we started opening it up, we forced every promo email to be at least 6. So where we steered the car all the way to the right where everything is 6 now. So you cannot get a promo email within the same week. Now you can still get transactional emails and messages, et cetera, et cetera. And then over time, we realized we're not sending enough emails. No, don't get me wrong, we're sending tons of emails, but there's a lot of people who actually don't get these promo emails just because they received another email or they just weren't on the list. And so then we transitioned to governance, manual governance. Now you have different teams coming to each other and be like, I got this global campaign I need to send, or this local team says, I have this global campaign. And so we have someone in marketing that has a calendar that says, okay, this will go here, this will go here. So it's very manual. And currently we're working on a more sophisticated way, a concept of what we call user fuel, where a user has a certain amount of points, and depending on the type of message for them, it will decrease the fuel increases over time, et cetera, et cetera. So it's like a wave of different manually governed, and now we're going more towards intelligence.
Got it. Yeah, that's pretty cool. The fuel concept, I like it. It's almost like measuring their remaining patience with you, right? Like, so as you message them, kind of reduces and hopefully refills over time.
Yes. Yeah.
Hopefully
it does refill.
So one of the things I wanted to touch on is I suspect that literally everybody on the call has used Slack and probably has used both products, I would imagine. But I would suspect that if we said in-app notifications at Slack, I think everybody would know what that means, right? It would mean the badging and the how do I know while I'm using the product that somebody's trying to reach me. When Tommy and I were first talking about in-app notifications and in-app messaging at Airbnb, it wasn't really clear to me, because I think the way I would look at this, and I don't want to be reductive here, but I think of Slack as an application. I think of Airbnb as more like a website, right? And it's got pages, and so I was like, okay, well, where does in-app fit into this? And what you shared with me, like, again, blew my mind here, Tommy. Could you tell us a little bit more about how in-app works?
Yes. So following the same theme of empowering non-technical folks to be able to grow the business, to grow the community, giving them levers. So things that are like email, push, SMS, but we want to take it one step further. So we started allowing them to build landing pages. Okay, so then you got landing page, but how do you drive it to it? How do you take the top of the funnel or users in different stages, and how do you drive them to some of these really great landing pages, or even if you don't want to take over the whole thing, how do you give messages? So we started off with, on the home screen, we eventually ended up on, you can actually configure the whole home screen. So right now the whole home screen is configured through this tool, and that's highly managed. But before that, we also have predefined slots on the homepage that different teams can put in a disaster message or a promotional message or an upcoming launch message. Now that's the home screen. When you're searching for something in a city, we also let different teams be able to promote different types of supply. So let's say you want to promote apartments in Tokyo, because apartments we have currently, there's a high surplus of that versus single rooms. We also allow you to have put your own discounts at the top of search results, or, oh, you're searching in this area, 10% off, et cetera, et cetera. In addition, we started expanding more and more, because we turn this into a platform. So at the end of it, our team isn't actually adding all of this. There are other teams that are adding the capability for non-engineers to push out content to these channels. Another one is on the product detail page. When you look at a home, we allow you to write a message there to say, hey, look, this home is available for free for first-time COVID responders, or check this out. We also do it on the host dashboard. Now you can tell hosts, like, here's some tips, here's some insights, here's the disaster in your area, open up your place for open homes, etc. So we started adding more and more places throughout the app so that other teams can just push messages to relevant users.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool, because when I think about slots on the homepage, right, like my mind immediately goes to like contentful, and it's a content management problem. But in your case, right, you've thought about that as content that's delivered to a user, like an individual user that goes into areas, predefined areas within different pages. So like you've got the slots on the homepage, but you've also got a different number of slots in the search results, and like other pages have their own slots, and so you can target a set of users and then influence what content they're going to see.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Liza, when you think about personalization of messaging, I know you've already talked about preferences being one of them, but what did Slack, how did Slack think about being able to gather the data and understand which one of these channels to use to personalize like the delivery, but also is there any real personalization of the message, or is that kind of all user generated by the other person in the conversation?
All user generated by the other person in the conversation. So at the time that I left, and I don't think this has changed much to date, we weren't sending any notifications that were not generated by a user, and that was by choice. Especially because we were an enterprise software platform. We felt like that it just wasn't like our place early on to be like aggressively pulling people in. I think we changed our tune on that a little bit over time, but really wanted to make sure that anything we were doing was coming more from an educational perspective than it was from just trying to pull people back into the app. So that was just, so the content itself was not really like personalized in any way by Slack. Where we thought a lot about when we worked, we had a team out in New York that was what we called search, learning, and intelligence. And we worked closely with them to think about over time how we could help customize notification settings on a channel to channel basis. So in terms of defaults within Slack, I'm embarrassed to tell people this, but this is what the defaults were, and they were decided early on and very hard to change. It was not scientifically decided either. The first 10 users on a team receive notifications for all conversations. So for DMs, for channels, everything. After user number 10, we start sending only notifications for mentions and DMs. You can go in and update those to receive all notifications. But what that means is user 10 and user 11 have different notifications settings, which leads to like really weird expectations when people internally are teaching you how to use Slack and what to expect from Slack, which is challenging. So what we were starting to work on with that team was trying to, on a user-to-user basis, look at signals like how many notifications a user receives, how many channels a user is in, to help figure out going back to my earlier point, kind of contextual points to prompt people on whether or not it makes sense to adjust their notifications, either on a system level or like a workspace level or a channel level. And that was like where we were thinking about personalization. The one other thing I think really worth noting on the topic of personalization is I had this distinction between personalization and customization that I talked a lot about. The way I define that is customization, the user has agency in deciding what the settings are for their notifications. Personalization, or really anything. Personalization, the system has agency in deciding. So like I'd consider the Facebook timeline to be a highly personalized UI because the system is making a lot of decisions off of my inputs, but the system is making a lot of decisions of what I see. Whereas something like Jira, I would consider a very customized UI because the system is making, they could probably make a few more decisions. Jira, but and what I felt like was it was really important for us to focus first on customization in a work context, because at the end of the day, in a work context, I don't think this always carries over into B2C. I'd be curious if Tommy thinks so, but you know your work way better than we can predict, in the sense that and people change teams often, the units of work change a lot. So it's much harder for us to, we found, predict what's important versus giving users the tools like being able to drag and drop channels into what we call collections, and help that be signal for us in the future to help people figure out maybe what good notification settings are for them.
Got it. Yeah. And it's interesting when you brought up customization. I totally see the distinction there now. What I was first thinking of, and that reminded me of something Tommy's worked on, is because there's customization in your case that you're talking about, the end user being able to customize their experience. And then, Tommy, I know you've spent a lot of time on Omni, allowing internal employees to customize the experience that the user receives. Because I think one key distinction here is like a lot of the messaging you're sending is generated by your teams, right? Using data that's user generated, like what are the properties that are available, right? but it's a bit more of a mashup between data that's user generated and data that's like, or content that's being produced by different teams. You built out a whole sophisticated visual editor. Can you tell us a little bit about that kind of customization studio?
Yes, absolutely. And to touch off of what you said, where you can manually build these emails. Like, let's say you have a big launch coming out. We're not going to let a machine construct that email, because Brian's going to want, okay, we need this hero, it has to be perfect. We're going to have this custom font. We're going to say this. Like, Airbnb is a big marketing company. However, on the flip side of that, our retargeting emails are all purely machine generated. So you perform some action, you don't book. Okay, we're gonna retarget you with that, but we're gonna also, we actually have 30 different modules that we pre-created that we then put in the mix. So think of it as a page, like an email is a page. We will first put the home that you thought you were gonna book, and then we would fill the rest of the space from these 30 content modules. And even those modules will have also personalization, because if it's experiences we're gonna upsell you on, it's using a personalized ranking model. Same thing with homes as well. So it just to touch up on a mix of personalization and customization. And so the tool that we built, it's a WYSIWYG editor, where you open it up the tool and you say, okay, I wanna create a campaign. So you create the campaign, you say it's gonna start from here to here. This is my team, because we build the teams. And then we say, okay, what language do we want it in? Because we support users in 62 different languages. So we have translations built in. And then you choose, okay, my campaign, I want to create content. I want to create a landing page. I want to create an email. I want to create a push notification, and I want to create a search banner. So you have what we call 4 placements, or their channels. And then you go in and you drag components on to your emails. The top to be the hero. Then you upload an image, or you can use an image that we have a library media manager. Then you can add a CTA. Oh, and then the next really cool part is a mix of customization and personalization. So let's say I manually typed in the top 2 parts. I can drag a module that has listings or experiences, but you don't have to type in every single listing or experience. When we render the email, we will make an API call to our ranking service that ranks all the homes and experiences in the product already. So you get that. In terms of also personalization is, I can type in the subject line, hello, Troy, or hello, Liza, right? But then everyone would get both of your names. So we made it possible for non-developers. We use a syntax where you can interpolate their username, their user last name, the last place they booked, where they live. And that actually is extensible, because we seed it with about 100 different variables. It's trivial for any other team to come on and add their own variables. Yeah,
that's cool. And so these modules, they're basically, I would call them blocks, right? And in your case, it's internal employees that are putting these blocks onto these message canvases effectively, and like dragging and dropping to reorder them and clicking in and customizing them. And it reminds me, obviously, Liza, like to us, it's different, but Slack, I think, has something similar, but more focused externally. And I know this is slightly true, Tommy. You've done some work to enable developers on other teams as well. But I think Liza, Slack is focused almost entirely on enabling engineers that are interacting with the platform with BlockKit. I think that there's some comparison here.
Yeah, absolutely. And BlockKit was, for those of you who have not built on the Slack platform, the UI framework that we provide to developers to build UI in Slack. Initially, when we built it, when I worked on it, it was just to allow you to attach content to messages. Now it actually allows you also to work across different surface areas. So similarly to what Tommy describes in some ways, we bring it into modals, and now they're recently launching it where you can bring it into a full page display. But yeah, similarly allows this structured content. And in terms of the way that third-party developers send messages into Slack, we wanted to find we wanted to improve. I don't know if anybody built on Slack in the early days here, but that is a fun story I won't dive fully into, but our whole platform was built off of the code that was written in 2 days to help unfurl links. We used that JSON schema for our entire platform for 2.5 years. That was the only display that people could do in Slack. So when I took on the problem of how do we provide developers a canvas so that they can display rich information in Slack, we wanted a balance of giving developers a lot more control of what they could display. That way, like if Asana is sending a notification into Slack, they could really, one, make it kind of look and feel like their own brand, but also make that like a usable, interactive UI. On the same side, we wanted some control on Slack side so that you didn't just have people throwing iframes into messages and everywhere in Slack, so that you could provide a consistent user experience. So that's how we landed on BlockKit, and it allowed us this really flexible environment to provide new types of display information that third-party developers could use to send into Slack as notifications in a message, or interact with via a slash command, or what we now call actions. And so definitely like a similarly flexible UI framework. And what it enabled is non-technical users to really easily format their messages. And I'm still, like, to this day, have friends that build on Slack that say their designers just use what we call the BlockKit builder, which is also like a WYSIWYG, it is a WYSIWYG drag and drop editor where you can pull in these different blocks. So now a designer can come in and say, this is what I want it to look like. You don't have to have, as a PM, what you have a lot, that annoying back and forth of like, can we build this? Can we not build this? Can it look this way? Can it not look this way? It gives the engineering team and the design team and the product team the same set of tools to really understand what their sandbox or playground is. And the other really nice thing is it just spits out the JSON. So you don't really have to worry about having somebody deal with the front end too much. You just need to figure out how to put that into the business logic.
Got it. Yeah. So, my last question for the both of you, and then we'll open it up to some questions from the audience. You both have built pretty sophisticated notification and messaging systems at your respective companies. Could you give us a feel for just kind of like, what did the team look like, right? How big was the team? How long did it take to kind of build some of this out? So we'll start with you, Liza.
So the core team, I believe, should have been bigger, but it was. I always wanted more resources, so there was more to do as many of us do. It was me, an engineering manager, and a designer, and we had 2 staff back-end engineers. And this was from the back-end perspective, that was the most complex part of our product service area.
Yep.
And then we had 1 front-end engineer, 1 iOS, 1 Android. And that's been doubled since, so it's bigger today. But because that was the first time that we had kind of centralized notifications, there was notifications work that was also spread throughout the org in different areas. Primarily, we worked with the infrastructure team. So that was, I would say, we had at least 1 to 2 people that dedicated half their time. So probably like a full person on our infra team that was worried about notifications. Ops spent a lot of time on notifications. It was like we often had challenges. Unfortunately, the number of times I was pulled into channels for incidents was more than I would have liked as a PM. So ops spent a lot of time with our team as well. We had 2 people that spent a good amount of time on notifications. And then I had half of a marketer as well. We didn't need to do too much marketing, but yeah, that was kind of the way that our team looked. And but we, in many ways, were also gearing up to be more of a platform team, so that as we experimented with things like sending notifications when new people join your team, which we have started to do now, which is still like user generated, but it's not because a message was sent. We've started to kind of build out like a platform area where other teams can work with us to make sure that configured in a good way. So I would say there's probably 2 people that work cross-functionally on that.
Got it. And yeah, it's funny you mentioned the ops thing. It just calls to mind. I know when I was first starting to talk to some of the team over at Slack, they shared like a ludicrously high percentage of their support volume is related to notifications. Yeah,
that was like one of the key OKRs of our team, actually, was lowering support volume. And if this is interesting, happy to dive into it more too in Q&A. But a big reason for that was where we started this conversation, which was oftentimes when people wrote into support, and usually the first message is my notifications are broken. Versus like other issues where people like to write a lot of detail. We had so many that with notifications. I've talked to other, like I have friends at Facebook that work on notifications, are like, oh yeah, same for us. They're just broken, is what people write in. And very often they're actually working as expected, but they don't meet the user's expectation for how the notifications are supposed to work.
Got it.
Either because they're in do not disturb, or their system is in do not disturb, or they are they're one of the users that now only gets notifications for app mentions. So that was a lot of the support volume for notifications. That was more of a product issue. But it definitely was a challenge for us in terms of support and notifications.
And Tommy, you look like you were nodding in violent agreement. Has that been something you've had to deal with as well?
Well, it's funny, it's embarrassing, okay? So speaking of number one problems it's the user, right? That their settings, or they didn't match it. Okay, so you know how our tool Omni is used for non-developers? These are folks that work at the company, and they build an email, and part of the tool, you could send yourself a test email. So you're building a promotional category email and you send yourself a test. Time and time again, they come to us and say, your test is broken, I didn't get to receive an email. And then we're like, okay, we stop what we're doing, we debug it, we look like, okay, the email was cute, et cetera, et cetera. Then the final thing we look at is their Airbnb email notification subscription. So we go there and we say, you aren't subscribed to the company's emails that you work at.
Oh, wow, a little embarrassing. That's great. And Tommy, what about the team that works on Omni and Rookery? What does that team look like?
Yes, so it has evolved. So I'll start from where it around when it's picked up steam. So the notifications infrastructure team around 3 years ago was about 5 engineers, no product manager, just 5 engineers and an engineering manager. At that time, our team worked very closely because we were sending the most emails, but we were a product and program team. So when I speak about product program, we have product programs and platforms. Platforms are things people build on. Programs or products are things users interface with, and programs are time box sensitive or just franchises that you just this type of email, this type of campaign. So we were doing these two, and over time, this team, their responsibility shifted to our team. And that's when we took on the infrastructure, then we told ourselves, it was just myself and another engineer. We started to take the program, product, and platform together. And so it was around 2 years ago that we started Omni. And Omni, under the hood, we're not just a UI tool. We actually are responsible for 12 different services underneath the hood. And it includes what you said, Rookery is the notification infrastructure, but we also have a targeting system because well, what good are notifications if you can't target people? But we also have a queuing system. We also have something that arbitrates between emails as well. And so our team grew, and at this point, we're about 20 engineers. We have one product manager, so we're short-staffed on product management. We have a design program manager, which is rare because, well, for an engineering team, it's rare, but we have a design program manager because she coordinates the needs of all the other marketing teams that, hey, we need this type of email. Can you put it on your roadmap, et cetera, et cetera. And we also have a technical program manager as well. So it is quite cross-functional. And when we don't own too many programs anymore, but we do own a program that gets abandoned. So meaning there's a team that used to have this one program and that team doesn't manage it anymore. So we're the default team that has to keep that program running. So we need to revamp it and we need to write content, but we're not content writers. So we will borrow content writers from different teams for a short amount of time.
Got it. Awesome. Well, thank you both for fielding the questions. I want to make sure we grab 10 or so minutes with the audience, if you'd be willing to hang out and answer some questions, and then we'll break out into Hangouts and we can keep chatting after that if folks are interested. There's a little raise hand button in Zoom. If you want to use that, then we can see you, and we'll be happy to call on you and if you have any questions. Or you can just unmute yourself and say hello.
I'll go for it. Hi, everyone.
Hey, Mike.
Thanks to you all. This has been super interesting. Liza, I built on that early Slack platform, and it was interesting. It's very satisfying to hear it was a 2-day project. So I'm at Brex working on the notifications platform there, and I have a lot of questions for both of you, but maybe the most relevant one is about it's a platform team providing, for Tommy, a platform team providing slots in the product for notifications of different priorities. How do you make decisions about who gets priority when you have different product teams who all have important things to say?
Great question. And it's also that, Mike, that you're at Brex. I have a lot of friends at Airbnb that are at Brex too. So really cool, small world. Okay, to answer your questions. So it's actually managed. It's on the channel, it's managed differently because you got to know we're a platform, so we enable people, but we don't own these product services. Different teams own the product services. So, okay, let's say we do own email channel, but another team owns the search channel, another team owns the product detail channel. So they handle it themselves. And so I'll talk about email and I'll share how they do it. For email, so transactional emails will always get to you no matter what. Even if 100 come to you, they'll always get to you. The retargeting emails, we do have a system that will rank them, will queue them for a little bit, and then depending on your other actions that you take. So let's say we have an abandoned search email, so we'll queue that up. But if right before we send that out, we see that you abandoned your cart, we will actually send the abandoned cart email, which is more high intent email. So that's automated. Now let's get to the manual marketing one. This is not as sophisticated as you might think. We have an override. So all emails have a priority of 0, and you can manually increase the priority. And so, but again, this is governed. So we know the emails that people want to change the priority to. And that's more of just a backdoor entrance so that if executive or Brian says, okay, this is a host email, we got, no matter what, this has to supersede any other promotional emails going out. So we would just increase that number to 7 or 5 or 100. Does that answer your question, Mike? Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that does. Do you have issues when you have a lot of emails that are going at the same priority?
Okay, so when that happens, what we do is we would rank the emails. So if it has to happen around the same time. So let's say there's an email that's scheduled to go out tomorrow for you and an email that goes out for you today. That's too far apart for us. So we'll send this one first. But if there are 2 that are going out to you within the same several hours, we will rank the email based on the CTR that we think you'll click through.
Okay, thanks.
That's using kind of your internal ranking system, right, Tommy? Like where you've got a system that's doing that, for example, for the search results screen.
Yes.
Cool. George, I think you had a question.
Oh, sure. Yeah, actually, a question for Tommy. I understand that Airbnb, that you have this really complex system that you've developed internally. But I think I understand that you used to use like an outside vendor, or you explored like outside vendors for some of your marketing and messaging needs. So I'm curious, like, what was that experience like? Like, why did you go that way in the first place? And then why did you eventually transition off?
Oh man, okay, great question. Okay, so early on in Airbnb's history, we did have, Rookery is one of the oldest services. We always had a service that would call SendGrid, call Spark Posts. But over time, before we started Omni, we still had the need. Siri. Okay, so we still had a need for non-engineers to be able to send emails. So we used Campaign Monitor, like MailChimp, all of those. And so over time, that worked out well. Then it was about 2.5 or 3 years ago where security said we cannot have people downloading CSVs of users, uploading it in some third-party tool and sending it out, okay? So all of that got axed almost instantly. So now these folks don't have anything to use. And so we started building out Omni to service that need. And so, yes, we have explored different things. And so we had to end up on building it internally. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that did. I think I'm curious. So specifically, I know that like Airbnb at least tried out like Braze for like omni-channel marketing. And so I actually wasn't aware of the MailChimp campaign monitor story, which I think is super interesting, but I'm also curious like what the experience was maybe like with Braze, if that was like something that worked or not.
Okay, so that specific use case I'm not aware of, but here's the thing, the company is really big, and for a very, very long time, things you can, as a team, just use anything. You can hook up any API. It was a Wild West, I'm telling you. Over time, we did try to centralize it. So yes, I'm sure a team used it successfully, and maybe that team then changed and that tool was just sitting around and no one was using it. And so then eventually we have to start axing external tools that we would use.
Cool. Yeah, thank you.
And Taylor, I think you had a question.
Yeah, thanks, Troy. So this is actually for Liza. I really liked your point on, you know, in context, allowing users to control, you know, whether it was do not disturb over the weekends, whatever it might be. You know, in what we're doing right now, notifications are pretty important in engagement and retention and kind of reducing churn or re-engaging folks who might be on their way to churn. We don't have anything in the sense of allowing people or driving folks to configuration and context. How did you balance potentially driving someone to modify their settings for a notification that could be critical in their usage or different business objectives that could potentially result in a negative impact on those objectives?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So the kind of early decision, I think a good kind of example point here is our early decision making around do not disturb. And the first iteration of that product set a default that we would turn off notifications for all users between 10 p.m. and 8 a.m. ended up being the decision. And that did affect our metrics, our user metrics. At Slack, it was a really tricky balance because the business was measured over, we could look at usage and usage was important, but we also wanted to be mindful of the fact that people having a good experience using the product was what was most important in terms of people renewing using the service. And what we didn't want is people to feel really overwhelmed by work all of the time. So I just want to caveat that because it can be a bit of a different measure for success in an enterprise company in that way, which is more usage is not always better usage. That was a really tricky balance, like over the years at Slack in terms of what was good usage of Slack. That being said, I would say in terms of how we would think about users not missing information that's really important. Something that we built into Do Not Disturb was always giving the sender an override. So if let's say Troy is in Do Not Disturb and he's either put himself in Do Not Disturb or he is in Do Not Disturb by default at night, and I send him a message, I have the option as a sender, I'll receive an ephemeral message that says, do you still want to send this message? He's in Do Not Disturb, but would you still want to send Troy this message? And that was a really key piece for our user experience. And I think that could be extrapolated to other situations, but it's it's a bit tough out of messaging where we allow the user to override whether or not the message should be sent. So that's kind of where we put the control. And that was the main thing that we had for we don't want to stop somebody from sending a mission critical message just because the other person is in Do Not Disturb. And I think the last thing that's probably worth mentioning around changing notification defaults is and I think this is true across most products, not just Slack, what you're often up against is people turning off their notifications at the system level, and that's what you don't want. So you want to do anything in your power, no matter what product you're running, what channel you're using, to not drive somebody to unsubscribe or turn off notifications at the iOS or Android level, because at that point you can't resurrect them at all. So that's why I always say you get and often in marketing context, you may get a big benefit early on from sending a bunch of stuff to get somebody in the product. Over time, that may actually bite you in the ass. Does that answer the question, Taylor?
It does. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much, both of you guys. Thank you.
Yeah, and Mike, I saw you +1 that question. It just made me think of something related. I was talking to a fintech customer this morning, who was describing that they have, you know, marketing communications, then they have notifications that are related to engagement, and then they have notifications that are like regulatory, compliance related, where it's the customer just has to receive them. They can't not receive them. They had a whole bunch of other kind of needs to be able to like capture audit history, like prove to the auditors you made a good faith effort to deliver this message. I don't know if that's relevant to Slack or Airbnb. Airbnb, I would imagine, might have some of this need, right?
Absolutely. So every year we have to send update on policy. Especially on for all users. There's always a policy update, and more regularly at the host level, laws change. So we have to tell hosts, or just something changes on the platform, the host, and it gets more even challenging. It's by city. So every city, a group has to draft it up and type it properly. And sometimes they have to type it in the language that is relevant to that demographic and not use third-party vendor translators. So yes, we have to do a lot of those that you just spoke about.
Yeah, and then you have to make sure your unsubscribe infrastructure is smart enough to know, like, no, like no matter what, you have to deliver this.
At Robinhood, we actually had to send stuff in physical mail if people unsubscribed by email. I think they got around that at a certain point, but really early on, because we were worried about canned spam law, if people unsubscribed, overriding, I like literally sent envelopes in the mail in the early days that were sending.
Wow.
Yeah, crazy. We didn't have lob back then, so you couldn't even do that via.
Right. Cool. Anybody else on the call? You can maybe next time in the slides up front we'll do a little Zoom thing. You can click the participants tab, and then you can click raise hand in the bottom right, or you can just unmute and ask a question if you have anything.
Yeah, I had a question about the telemetry that you guys respectively have put in place to be able to track, not just was it sent to someone, but did they receive it, and the click-through rate on different types of notifications to presumably rank them or do data analysis on them or improve them. Can you talk about kind of the measurement or analytics or telemetry piece?
You want me to go first, Tommy? Slack was not good at this. I'm just going to be like very honest up front. In terms of metrics we looked at as a team, deliverability was really important for us. And since a lot of you guys work on notifications, you probably know a lot of things get dropped at the system level. It's not just you. So we spent a lot of time working on deliverability across iOS and Android, and like the Facebook team, I talked to engineers on, there are really, anybody who's worked on notifications at Facebook, really good people to talk to about this as well. They actually built their whole own system for improving deliverability. They got theirs above like 95%, I think. Ours were actually much lower. You'd be surprised, a lot of people are surprised at how many notifications just get dropped. So we spent a lot of time from a metrics perspective, just like, did the notification that was supposed to get sent get delivered? And that was, if that was off at all, it was the main thing our team was working on. We didn't do a ton of work with email on my team specifically. A lot of that existed, but we used Adobe Marketing Cloud, and like a lot of that all existed within the marketing team. And that is the one we sent a lot of our like promotional, educational, all that went over email because we didn't want it to conflict with in-product. Some of the other stuff that we looked at was a lot of the metrics we looked at were probably just more specific to Slack, like how quickly a channel loads when you click on a notification. Those are all, you get routed to the right place. Like a lot of our metrics are pretty infrastructural and basic versus product related. It was stuff we were working on instrumenting, but we didn't have anything in place by the time that I had left.
Nice. For us, so for email, we use SendGrid and SparkPost, and they have webhooks and callbacks. So we have those make an API call to one of our services, and all that service does is listen to those API requests. It will take the raw payload that they give us, and then we use Airflow behind the scenes to do all of our data processing. So we'll take the raw data, We'll find the user it was meant for. Then we'll grab the email content, the settings, everything, as much data as we can to jam it into one row. And we create a derived Hive table in our data warehouse so that other teams can do data analysis on later on. So that's how we do that in a nutshell.
Cool. Thank you.
Cool. Hey, Tommy, I'm curious, you mentioned that you use SendGrid and SparkPost. Why two email providers? Is it, different providers for different messages? Is it like a fallback? Like what's the deal there?
Yes, absolutely. It's pretty critical to have more than one, because what if one goes down? They do go down. And what if one's deliverability all of a sudden gets hurt? It does happen. So we've measured the downtime. I can't share the exact numbers, but we
Sure.
measured downtime in email delivery, push delivery, SMS delivery. It hurts money. Like money actually drops in the millions. So it matters a lot. So you always got to have fallbacks.
Got it. And so you were using one, and then you would kind of like dynamically detect there was a problem and then switch over to the other one until the issue was resolved. Is that roughly what was happening there?
So we send a percentage to one, and we always keep a percentage to the other one. And then, yes, if there's a detection at any, then we will shift more to the other one. So it's not a 50-50.
Yeah. So you're shifting, you're pushing, some percentage to one of them because you want to keep the IPs warm, and you want to got it. Cool.
Yes.
Oh, interesting. So Adrian shared in chat that when he worked with the Gap, Adrian, why don't you tell everybody this?
Hi, I'm Adrian. I'm the developer advocate at Courier, but I used to work for SparkPost, so talking about Airbnb was part of my pitch. But before that, I worked for a company called ExactTarget, and I worked in the global services department where Gap was one of my clients. So I worked with Banana Republic, Gap, Old Navy, all of that. And if we missed an email, like they knew exactly how much they were losing out. They had a science around all the deliverability and analytics around the messages, so they knew how much an email made them. It's pretty interesting.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining. Thank you, Tommy and Liza, for sharing some of your experience and expertise from Slack and Airbnb. One of the inspirations behind this was actually a conversation Tommy and I had, where I shared with them that I spend my day job is talking to amazing folks that work in this space, and realizing that I think that there's not enough opportunities for all of you to connect with each other. Right? Because there's a lot of lessons to be learned here. It's a pretty complex space. And so I'm really hoping, to learn from amazing folks like these two who can kind of tell us more about what they're working on. But also I'm hoping that you'll use this as an opportunity to connect with each other and, form relationships where, as you're working on some of the infrastructure projects that you have, people that you can reach out to who are also working on something similar, and maybe they're ahead of you or behind you. But I think that there's an opportunity here to make stronger connections in the notification and communication infrastructure space. But thank you for coming, and please hang out and chat and meet everybody.